Well, thank you for watching. This is a second video on multiculturalism in psychology and psychotherapy. In this video, I would like to explain that I do recognize that there can be a rational approach to multiculturalism, which is helpful in terms of making psychotherapy as effective as possible. So one of the benefits of multicultural competence, or one of the good ways to understand multicultural competence, is recognizing the fact, or the value of recognizing the fact that people come from different cultures and have different upbringings, so to speak. So, you know, like if somebody comes from like a Western culture, it means that they were brought up in a more sort of like individualistic way than somebody who comes from like a Latin or Islamic culture, or like an Eastern European culture and stuff like that. So if you read up on the ways that children are generally brought up and socialized in different cultures, then it's you can have some sort of like hypothesis in terms of you know, knowing that this person comes from this particular culture, and you know, it's likely that they were brought up in this particular way. But again, you don't know that for sure, because of course their family may be sort of like an outlier in terms of the general pattern of child rearing, and maybe because their family is an outlier, that's why they're coming to therapy or something like that. So again, it's not hard evidence about some type of upbringing, but it's, you know, something to keep in mind, something to base your case conceptualization on, or your understanding of the person's personality on. In this regard too, something that is being talked about in sort of like multicultural classes in you know, in counseling or psychotherapy programs, is that so like on the one hand, you are supposed to be multiculturally competent and to treat sort of like, or to tailor your approach differently to people from different cultures. Okay, so you gotta really keep in mind that, okay, this person is you know, was born like in Mexico and lived there for like 20 years, or like this particular person is from you know, is black, and that's why you know, so like whatever, you know, like the general patterns of socializing are in the black community, and so on. So it's like on the one hand. On the other hand though, you are told that it's unethical, right? Unethical to prejudge people, or to have like biases towards people or towards clients based on the culture that they're coming from. So, you know, so a completely different message. So basically, you shouldn't worry, or you shouldn't care about which particular culture this particular person is coming from. So you get completely different messages. And also the message is that on both these sides it's unethical. So it would be unethical to not keep in mind what culture the person is coming from, and also it would be unethical to have any sort of like presuppositions or prejudgments based on which culture or subculture the person is coming from. And this is very interesting because of course, if you get this message that it's whatever you do or whatever approach you take, it's like unethical, then there is an effect of like paralysis, right? So like, okay, I should care a lot about where this person is coming from, which culture he is coming or she is coming from, and I shouldn't care about it at all, right? And it's interesting to sort of understand or think about why. But regardless, I just wanted to mention that recognizing which culture the person is coming from is very valuable in terms of helping you sort of like understand that person and understand the general community that he or she was brought up in, and their social milieu, so to speak. And a second approach to multicultural competence, or factor of multicultural competence, that makes a lot of sense to me and that I see a lot of value in, is recognizing your own sort of like cultural biases or, you know, prejudgments about certain cultures, and which could manifest themselves as microaggressions during the session. So, for example, like let's say if you're a white counselor, right, and then you get a black client, right? Well, you may have, even if you consciously don't have like any, let's say, racist beliefs or anything like that, you don't think that, you know, black people are like inferior in some way or anything like that, but still during the session, and you may not even notice it, you may be treating the person like significantly differently, in terms of maybe you don't let them finish the sentence, you know, and you interject very frequently, or you don't make a lot of eye contact, or maybe you talk to them in a way, you talk to them as if they were like a child or something like that. I'm making this up, but you know, sort of like automatic sort of like microaggressions that you may not be even aware of. And I think sort of like recognizing the possibility of those, and you know, bringing them up probably in the session, in terms of like, hey, you know, you're like my first black client, you know, I have if sort of like our cultural differences make talking to me uncomfortable for you in some way, or you have any reservations about the way I approach working with you, then you know, please let me know, and we'll sort of like address that and talk about that. So I see again a lot of value in that, you know, from the standpoint of multicultural competence. Again, you know, like my previous video when I was sort of like critical of a certain approach to multicultural competence, you know, again, I want to make sure I mention that I recognize that it's important to understand that people coming from different cultures will differ in the ways they were socialized and brought up and so on. And also that you may have some like cultural biases, or you may automatically treat people from different cultures sort of like differently in a significant way, in that you may have some microaggressions in terms of your behavior with people from some cultures. So that being said, I would like to give a couple of examples where I think or of the detrimental effects of a certain approach to multiculturalism that I've come across. So the first example is this. I was kind of shocked to learn about it, but there is quite a bit of research looking at sort of like at the possibility that it's beneficial for black children, like that corporal punishment is beneficial for black children, right? Because it's just very widespread in the black community in America that parents, you know, inflict pain on their children as a as part of the discipline or punishment or something like that, spanking and, hitting and beating and stuff like that. Now, there is this approach to this from like a multicultural perspective that it's just the part of the black culture, and it just works differently with black people, right? And so, or with black children, right? And so there are these research articles published in reviewed psychological journals and stuff like that, scientific papers, where they look at basically the effects of corporal punishment on children within black households, on these children's behaviors in school, right? And so most of that research, as far as I could see, the consensus was that it's actually beneficial, right? It may be beneficial. Corporal punishment may be beneficial for black children because it's correlated with these children acting out less in school, being, calmer, being less of a nuisance or of a problem. And to me, that's kind of racist. So, like, okay, we have all this data, right, about the effects of spanking and corporal punishment on just like, white children and, let's say Asian children and stuff like that. I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure if there were like black children in those studies, but we know just in general, let's say, what happens if a child is getting hit, right, or spanked. So they experience extreme fear, right? And the levels of cortisol in their blood, skyrocket. Now, given if these children go through this experience like on a frequent and regular basis, then it shapes their brains in a certain way. Like, so if they have these cortisol levels up, very high for a prolonged time, their hippocampus begins to shrink, their frontal lobes begin to shrink, and as a result, these children will have impaired impulse control, will be prone to engage in different addictive behaviors, in abuse drugs and stuff like that. They won't have good like social skills and that sort of thing. Now, given that knowledge, if we just then say, or if these researchers say, hey, it might be good for black children to receive pain and really be hit within their households because it makes them like behave better in school. Well, that's kind of saying that we completely don't care about the experience of these children, right? About the abusive effects and horrible detrimental effects of parental violence upon them. As long, as it keeps them sort of like in line in school, as long as it keeps them, keeps them from not being a particular nuisance for the adults, that's just great for them. And so, of course, the basic premise that would make this approach possible is this premise that culture, that different things are good for people in different cultures, right? So if we can say that like within white households, spanking and physical punishment, physical abuse is horribly detrimental for children, but like but that's just white children, right? Because these children are black, for them it may be quite beneficial, right? And it sort of seems to me like in this particular case, multiculturalism and cultural relativism, right, is used as a justification for abuse of children. And I have a huge problem with that. So that's Example number one, and it's probably the biggest example, the most telling. But the second example is this. A friend of mine is in a different master's program in mental health counseling, and he has this multicultural counseling class. And basically, so far, the biggest part of the class has been that they've been reading all these articles about all types of oppression. Everybody is oppressed in the society. Well, of course, the poor people are oppressed. Welfare, of course, disregarding, and then, of course, all the different ethnic and racial minorities are oppressed. But also the middle class people are oppressed because they are. I don't remember why exactly, but it's something like they are being disjointed from their working class brothers by capitalism or by capitalists or something like that. So everybody is being oppressed. Well, that's of course just mad. That's like, if everybody is being oppressed by everybody, how does that work? It cannot be. But apart from just the fantastical nature of this sort of idea, one of the practical ramifications of it is this. During another class within the same program, they were talking at length about countertransference, in psychotherapy. And of course, countertransference is like your reactions as a therapist to your client, right? When they sort of like remind you of somebody, of like a significant figure from your early childhood. So, right, and you can have like an automatic reaction as if you're reacting to the client, but in fact you're just reacting to that significant adult from your childhood that you see the client as representing, right? I know if this makes sense, but it's sort of like the reaction of the psychotherapist towards the client, so like an irrational reaction when the therapist sees another person in the client, right? And so talking about countertransference can be extremely productive, of course, for a psychotherapist, because it makes you more rational, it makes you more effective with your clients. But at the same time, it can be, of course, quite uncomfortable and painful for the psychotherapist, because it'll bring up some sort of like pain from the childhood, and you'll have to look at things that you haven't looked at before, and you will have to grieve certain things and accept certain truths about yourself that you haven't noticed before and stuff like that. Very hard work, but very rewarding work for the therapist, and then by proxy for the clients as well. Now, in this program, they were talking about psychotherapy, and then they were talking about countertransference within psychotherapy, and then the class was broken down into small groups, and they watched a video of a psychotherapy session, and they were to share countertransference reactions that they felt while watching the video. So potentially it's a very deep and helpful and useful exercise, right? Because it's a prompt for you to look at yourself, look at your feelings, look at the thoughts that came up, and rationally assess and appraise those, right? Now, my friend, for example, he shared some of the countertransference, so like reactions that were coming from his past with the members of his group. But a decent chunk of people in his group, of the other people, were sharing things like they felt countertransference in that their internalized oppression came up. right? Their internalized oppression came up, right? So I don't know what exactly it means, but of course it cannot mean anything rational or anything real. Like it means something to the extent of, you know, like they were oppressed as like middle class citizens, or as, you know, as members of a certain community, and so what came up for them is this internalized social oppression, right? Which it doesn't mean anything, but what it does for them, it manages their anxiety around needing to explore countertransference, right? So where countertransference can be a very helpful tool and very rewarding and, you know, sometimes painful experience, exploration of countertransference, you know, then you can just not look into your past, into your like primary relationships with your um, parents and other caregivers and siblings and stuff like that, and look at all the traumas. You can be just like, oh yeah, you know, what came up for me is all this oppression that I got from like the capitalists and stuff like that, and you can just rant about that at great lengths and feel like you've accomplished something, but in fact you've been just like engaging in a defense and you haven't made any progress in terms of your self-knowledge. And again, this is only possible because of this this idea that, you know, all people are different. You know, people like in the middle class are, you know, somehow fundamentally different and oppressed by people like in the capitalist class or something like that. So these are just some clarifications on my understanding of sort of like the multiculturalist approach, and maybe if I were to sort of like sum it all up, again, I think that recognizing the differences, or the potential differences or likely differences between people coming from different cultural upbringings is very important in terms of helping you empathize with the person more and understanding more of their early environment. But at the same time, when cultural relativism is used as either justification of abuse of children, for example, as in my first example, or if it's used as a defense for psychotherapists against doing self-work and recognizing and exploring countertransference, it is very dangerous. Thanks for watching.